Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Wednesday, May the 4th, 2022. We'll just start with some breaking news. Today, in the House of Commons, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was accused of swearing. So we see a video of him from CPAC coming down a hallway and about to turn into another hallway. And some reporters ask him about this. He's wearing a mask, and everyone in his party is wearing a mask. When he talks to the reporters, he takes off his mask, and then he puts it back on. This is what he had to say, quote, "What is the nature of your thoughts, gentlemen, when you say you move your lips in a particular way?" What a jerk. I'll just leave it at that. But why is this clown still wearing a mask? Let's talk about passing. This is a story from Revolver. The regime fears white Americans will outfox the affirmative action scam. Poor Caitlin Younger didn't stand a chance. A Wall Street Journal article recently profiled the young high school graduate who, despite a stellar academic record, will be attending Arizona State University after receiving rejection letters from the Ivy League schools and some University of California flagships. Quote, "Caitlin Younger has been an academic standout since she started studying algebra in third grade. She took her first advanced placement course as a freshman, scoring 1550 on her SATs as a junior at McKinney High School near Dallas, and will graduate this spring with unweighted 3.95 grade point average and is the founder of the school's accounting club. Along the way, she performed in and directed about 30 plays, sang in the school choir, scored top marks on the tests she has taken so far for 11 advanced placement classes, helped run a summer camp, and held down a part-time job. She is extraordinary," said Jeff Cranmore, her guidance counselor at McKinney High School. Younger, 18 years old, was cautiously optimistic when she applied to top U.S. colleges last fall. Responses came this month: Stanford, Harvard, Yale, Brown, Cornell, University of Pennsylvania, University of Southern California, University of California, Berkeley, and Northwestern all rejected her, unquote. Poor Caitlin just didn't get it. No doubt her parents raised her to work hard and try her best at everything. Almost certainly, she believed she lived in a meritocratic country where the most excellent would rise to the top and be rewarded. Sadly, Caitlin is wrong. The meritocratic America is dead and is now a husk, replaced by a caste-based spoils system. And Caitlin, being a white middle-class, probably heterosexual girl from a flyover state, is nearly at the bottom of this caste system. As Revolver described last year, Caitlin is a kulak. The modern American regime is built on explicit, institutionalized hostility to the people who most resemble the great Americans of the past. It is anti-white, anti-male, anti-Christian, anti-rural, and anti-middle class. The more of these traits a person has, the more worthy of hate they become. The white American middle class have become America's kulaks, blamed for every problem, vilified for every success, and deserving of every punishment. Their destruction has become a fundamental goal of American political life. If Caitlin wanted to be rewarded by America's elite institutions, she didn't need to show excellence. What she needed to show was fealty. Instead of an accounting club, she should have founded a post-George Floyd racial justice movement. Instead of being presumptively straight, she needed to make alphabet people a core part of her identity and at least call herself bisexual, like 12.5% of Harvard's latest class. But the single best thing Caitlin could have done to improve her admission cycle was simply not be white. The only reason Caitlin is stuck at ASU instead of being an auto-admit at the Ivy of her choice is because of her skin color. For decades, in flagrant disregard for every principle of equality or judging humans as individuals, America's elite colleges have systematically treated some races favorably and others unfavorably, solely based on skin color. It's not even in dispute. Faced with such flagrant hatred from the elites who rule over her, the best thing Caitlin Younger could do is refuse to play such a rigged game. Younger and all other kulak Americans should rebel against an unjust discriminatory system by lying about their race whenever possible. Last October, a poll made the rounds online. According to the poll, a full third of white people are already lying about their race on college applications, mostly by inventing bogus American Indian ancestry. This is from The Hill. A survey from Intelligent found that 34% of white students who applied to colleges and universities falsely claimed they were a racial minority on their application. The publication found that 81% of students who faked minority status did so to improve their chances of getting accepted. 50% of students who lied said they did it to get minority-focused financial aid. Most students, 48%, claimed to be Native American on their application. 13% falsely marked that they were Latino, while 10% falsely claimed to be Black. 9% of those surveyed lied that they were Asian or Pacific Islander. The survey doesn't pass the smell test for a variety of reasons. It's almost certain that the number of whites lying about their heritage is far lower. Of course, progressives reacted hysterically to the survey. So many students of color face incredible challenges to accessing higher education, and it's very sad that anyone will seek to lie in order to gain leverage in the admissions process, University of Maryland education professor Julie Park complained. Angel Perez, CEO of the National Association for College Admission Counseling, told Inside Higher Ed that actually white students lying about their race showed the need for more racial reckoning against them. This data truly saddens me, said Perez. The fact that students would believe they would be discriminated against for being white goes to show that we have a lot of work to do in this country around racial reckoning and understanding systemic inequality. Activist Rebecca Nagel freaked out that white Americans trying to evade discrimination was worse than anyone thought. Ibram X. Kendi, possibly America's single most powerful and dumbest racial grievance grifter, hastily deleted a tweet about the study. Despite all their anguish and rage, liberals admitted that there is almost nothing that can be done that would stop white students from gaining an advantage by reporting themselves as multiracial. Inside Higher Ed contacted several schools, most of which admitted they do nothing to confirm an applicant's claimed race. Jerome Lucido, an admissions expert at USC, lamely said that admissions workers could use triangulation to identify frauds. Emma Steele, a PR official with the Common App, simply warned that whites caught lying might be denied admission, but gave no indication about how any such lies would be detected. And the reason, of course, is that with proper preparation, a lie will never be caught. America doesn't have some centralized database of racial ancestry. Everything about America's unequal anti-white discrimination regime depends on white Americans' willful acquiescence. As Steve Saylor observed, America's massive racial spoil system relies on its white victims playing by the honor system while serving as the country's designated punching bag. This system has to run on an honor system because America's racial categories are ad hoc and phony and often reshaped to justify a perpetual attack on America's core heritage population. For all of American history, Americans of Middle Eastern or North African, MENA in bureaucrat speak, origin, have been counted as Caucasian on the census. In 2020, they were scheduled to be broken off into an invented new MENA category, but the Trump administration ultimately blocked the move. Why? Because activists wanted to benefit from anti-white discrimination rather than suffer from it. For many Americans, checking the right box on the U.S. Census form is a reflexive gesture, whether it's marking Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, American Indian, or all of the above. But for Americans of Middle Eastern and North African descent, or MENA, it's a real head-scratcher. They come in a variety of phenotypes and shades, ranging from pale to deepest ebony, and hail from 22 different countries, from Iran to Egypt to Sudan. And yet, for the census, since the beginning of the last century, the MENA community has been lumped into the white category. Boo! Back in 1909, such a designation made a lot of sense, but today, members of the MENA community are lobbying the U.S. Census to create a separate MENA category for the 2020 decennial count. White, they argue, renders them invisible in official population counts. Without correct data, advocates say, Cities and states lack adequate resources to effectively handle everything from funding educational programs to battling infant mortality to tracking employment discrimination to staffing hospitals with enough Farsi translators. I didn't know that was a problem. Census data directly impacts how more than $400 billion in federal funding is allocated across the country. What's more, some argue being classified as white prohibits the MENA community from taking advantage of the benefits that come with minority status, including local, state, and federal programs that give a leg up to minority owned businesses in awarding government contracts. That was from USA Today. And back to the Revolver author. Similar to the concept of MENA, the entire concept of Hispanic is basically a creation of the US Census Bureau. When the Hispanic Society of America, a museum and research library, chose its name in 1904, the name signified its focus on Spain and Portugal, with virtually no interest in Spain's former colonial holdings in the New World. In the early 20th century America, a Hispano referred only to Spanish speakers of New Mexico. It was the Nixon administration that changed everything in 1970 when it adopted the Hispanic label as a catch-all term for Americans whose origins ranged as widely as Mexico, Puerto Rico, and the Iberian Peninsula. Asking Americans about Central or South American ancestry was so novel at the time that some American residents of the Central or Southern United States checked the census box by mistake. Hispanic was added only as a census category in 1980. What makes one a Hispanic? No particular racial ancestry is needed. One can be a Black Hispanic, a Maya Hispanic, or a Jewish Hispanic. One can hail from Tijuana, Toledo, Havana, or Asuncion. There is no blood quantum necessary to qualify. A person of 100% Hispanic background may look like Montezuma, or he may look like J. Robert Oppenheimer. And yet, as useless as such a category is, there are real benefits to being in it. For example, simply being Hispanic means one can get into medical school with a far lower GPA or MCAT score. Right now, you would better believe that people with a single Spanish great-grandfather are marking themselves as Hispanic on census forms and college applications. And if Caitlin Younger had been able to claim a single Spanish ancestor on her college application, she might be celebrating her admission to Yale right now. Why does this category even exist? And why are so many people eager to join it? It's obvious, because everyone sees that boring, ordinary whites are the bad group in America, and the quickest way to get a leg up is to hop to another group. Last summer, Revolver published an expose on the National Minority Supplier Development Council, one of many private organizations whose actual purpose is to control access to America's racial spoil system. The NMSDC certifies businesses as authentically minority-owned. In effect, it awards literal race cards for businesses to play. And this is a quote from the document. What's one of the best ways to carve out a profit for yourself? Easy. Take advantage of America's quiet love of affirmative action. Does America really love affirmative action? I would think that the people who benefit thereby love it. As for everyone else, well, to get access to big government contracts and set-asides by major corporate actors, you need to be the right race. So how is that decided? For that, you can turn to a little-known organization called the National Minority Supplier Development Council. The NMSDC's goal is to help minority-owned businesses secure more business contracts through relationships with both government and hundreds of major corporate partners, ranging from Facebook and Google to Ford and GM to Walmart and Coca-Cola. How do you win a spot at NMSDC's table? By convincing the organization's officials that you deserve one of the coveted official race cards to play for fun and profit. How does the NMSDC decide if you're worthy of their coveted race card? Simple. The group defines a minority as an individual who is at least 25% Asian, Black, Hispanic, or Native American. To do that, one literally must submit a driver's license, a passport, a birth certificate, or the birth certificate of one's parent or child in order to prove one has the right racial group. And the NSMDC has a clear definition of who is right and who is wrong. After submitting one's racial evidence, a business is subjected to an in-person visit by an NMSDC inspector to make sure that the minority owners are really running day-to-day operations and that the minority owners really look like minorities. If you live in New England, your eligibility to be classified as oppressed may be decided by someone like Peter Hearst, the surprisingly pale Black, CEO of NMSDC's New England affiliate. As Revolver flagged at the time, many of the NMSDC's race card winners were almost wholly European in origin. And there are several pictures here. And you know what? Revolver says, good for them. The 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution explicitly guarantees the equal protection of the laws and therefore prohibits treating Americans differently on the basis of race. But America's ruling regime has nullified that clear constitutional provision, creating a new reality where wealth and titles and prizes are handed out solely based on what racial group one is sorted into. The American Constitution, the Golden Rule, and common sense morality all clearly call for equal treatment between racial groups. But the globalist American empire has chosen a very different moral code. It's a code with a rigid hierarchy where some races go to the top and others go to the bottom. It's a code where, whenever the group at the bottom succeeds, it is always assumed to be due to exploitation and mistreatment of others. It is a racist code, no morally different from Jim Crow or India's castes or the old Spanish casta tables. Protesting America's racial spoil system is necessarily, but ultimately inadequate. It is well past the time for the system and its managers to be undermined and humiliated. And the best way to do that is to stop playing along. Last year, after Evanston, Illinois became the first American city to explicitly adopt a system of racial reparations, we described a way forward for bringing the system down in a piece entitled, "Reparations Are Already Here, and There's Only One Way to Respond." And the Revolver piece concludes, the globalist American empire feebly admits that it has no easy way to stop its victims from cheating. So cheat away. Undermine the system. Force it to rely on color palettes and DNA tests and skull measurements to enforce its racial castes. Right now, this corrupt, immoral, and decaying system is controlling America for free. Force it to fight. Odds are it will simply break. Well, there's a similar situation in Canada, which has accelerated when a few years ago, a court decided that so-called Métis people have the same rights, powerful but undefined, as Native Indians. How do you get to be a Métis? Simply say that your great-grandmother or your great-great-grandmother or your great-great-great-grandmother was Indian. And hey, presto, you are now Métis and subject to all the benefits thereby. And we have another piece on the same theme by William Sullivan in The American Thinker. The early 20th century act known as passing referred to light-skinned Black Americans pretending to be white in order to avoid discrimination and gain access to the privilege of whiteness. It's an archaic term that is no longer in use, but that doesn't mean it no longer occurs. It just doesn't occur in the manner that it did when the term was in common use. Passing has a unique historical significance in this country that I first came to know while in college and studying Nella Larson's simply titled novel Passing from 1929. Larson was a Black author in the Harlem Renaissance that took place from the 1910s to the mid-1930s. Other well-known authors, such as W.E.B. Du Bois and Langston Hughes, were also key players in this artistic movement that tended to focus on pride for Black Americans' ample contributions to society, especially in cultural areas of life. The artists who expressed immense pride in Black culture because passers were seen as Judases who publicly renounced their own race in order to uniquely take advantage of a system of racial prejudice against Blacks. Worthy of note is that passing in America was a one-way phenomenon in which a member of a societally oppressed group posed as a member of another group that is less societally oppressed. Black Americans would often try to pass as white in order to gain privileges in a society that discriminated against Blacks due to skin color. White Americans of darker skin tone did not typically seek to pass as Black in order to suffer discrimination. We don't typically call pretending to be of another race in order to gain societal privileges passing anymore, but it certainly happens, and it's similarly a one-way street. What's different is the system of societal discrimination that is being navigated by the passers. Take Satchel Cole, an Indianapolis racial justice hustler who was exposed in the late summer of 2020 for having posed as a Black woman. "Friends, I need to take accountability for my actions and the harm that I have done," she writes. "I have taken up space as a Black woman while knowing I am white." She's not alone. Another left-wing race hustler on Twitter, Sean King, aka Talcum X, has for years pretended to be a black man and still maintains that he is black, despite the New York Times reporting in 2015 that both of his parents listed on his birth certificate are white. It's not limited to only the race hustling crowd, though. Academics seem to find a lot of value in passing, but similarly, it's never to pass as white. University of Wisconsin grad student C.V. Vitolo Haddad resigned from her teaching position, finally admitting that she is of Italian descent after years of claiming to be black. George Washington University history professor Jessica Krug is a white Jewish woman who presented herself as a black for years, only to later apologize and admit the lie. But who could mention this modern phenomenon without mentioning Rachel Dolezal? In 2015, after serving as the president of the Spokane chapter of the NAACP, she finally publicly admitted that she's white. I acknowledge that I was biologically born to white parents, but I identify as black, she said. Note that language. I identify as black. Dolezal serves as a great segue to the next point, which is that not only does passing still exist in the 21st century, it's evolved beyond race, and the logic behind it has become muddled. Dolezal is not in reality black. We all know that. She made a conscious choice to pretend to be a black person, and she didn't do it because she thought she would suffer societal discrimination for having done so. She did it for the societal advantages that being black in America would afford her. But her choice of words is worth considering. If she identifies as black, is she actually black? Because I'm constantly reminded by those who presume to speak for the cultural status quo that a man who chooses to identify as a woman is actually a woman. And isn't being a woman also tantamount to being a victim in our systemically racist patriarchal society? If that is so, then why is Will Thomas pretending to be Leah Thomas? So he can abandon the privilege that he enjoys as a white man in order to willingly accept persecution as a female? For that matter, if transgender Americans are so horribly discriminated against in society, why are so many publicly signing up to be persecuted by our society in that way? None of this, of course, is difficult to understand. Human beings act according to incentives, and if being black in 21st century America actually made one the victim of societal discrimination, wouldn't passing in the 21st century still look a lot like passing in the early 20th, when that was certainly the case? Why are there so many white people pretending to be black and so few black people pretending to be white if there were truly societal incentives offered by white privilege? You know the answer to those questions. Being societally perceived as a victim of societal discrimination affords societal privilege in today's world, and the only person left who's not a victim of societal discrimination of any kind is the heterosexual white man. Yet no one is attempting to pass as an ordinary heterosexual white man these days, you'll notice, and that's all you need to know to recognize that the victimhood narratives are nothing but lies. And this is an essay, Passing in the 21st Century, by William Sullivan at the American Thinker. Of course, 12.5% of the latest Harvard class claims to be bisexual. No. The huge numbers of young people who claim to be non-binary, no, they're not true. What these people are saying, please don't persecute me because I'm normal. That is the way that we live now. Let's go to the chat. Stolen Power, says Dr. Deadname. Good one. Hello to Anne Run, Don from Dion, Mercurius Olikis. Good morning from Australia, he says. Hello to Dan, Brian Frakes, Popcasso88, Denny McDougall. Chokin666 says, upper middle class people fighting center left poles thinking they're Maoist guerrillas. Hello to Hypocrite at the Gate, Oscar Toe, and Chokin666. Oscar Toe likes Russell's Mahler. It's one of the best films, I think. Ken Russell, that is. I'm halfway through it. Her parents shouldn't have named her Caitlin, says Hypocrite at the Gate. Oscar Toe said it is a far superior film to Savage Messiah. Considering the show title, please explain again why you think white nationalism is a crackpot idea, because there is no white nation. That's why. There's arguably an American nation or Canadian nation, although it's becoming harder and harder to argue that America is anything other, American Canada, or anything other than multilingual, multiracial, multicultural empires. Jim Smith, hello, says skin color. Ugh, can they not even say race anymore? David the Gnome, hello, says, remind me of that 80s movie, The White Guy Who Gets into College by Wearing Blackface. Good evening from the overcast and cool Midwest USA, says Buddy. It is overcast and cool here in Victoria, and again, it's been the case all year that the temperature is running, the daily high is running about 8 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit lower than historical norms. And again, it must be this great, global warming I hear so much about. There were historically record low temperatures in Victoria and other places on Vancouver Island earlier this year. Oh, yes. What was that movie? Radon Chong is in it, and the guy's name is Tommy something or other. I'm as white as the non-black bits of the ace of spades, though I identify as a sort of rich molasses color, says Anne Run. I'm surprised Soul Man isn't banned. Yeah, that's the name of the film. Kevin the Ball fans here demand more Joseph Tainter, says Buddy. C. Thomas Howell. Yes. Apparently people call him Tommy. LOL, she did marry her Soul Man co-star, says David the Gnome. Radon Chong is what? She's half black and half Chinese. The daughter of Tommy Chong, the Canadian who was once signed to Motown. I only recognize her as the Gargoyle woman from the Tales from the Dark Side movie, says David the Gnome. And more, okay, once more, boo. She played a Cro-Magnon in Quest for Fire, says Chogokin 666. Radon Chong is Canadian, I guess, says Oscar Toe. Everyone is in Hollywood is Canadian. Don't you know that? No, that's what Canadians, you've heard me say this before, but it's true. How can you tell the Canadian in the room? He's the one who's always saying he or she is really Canadian, Many white-speaking, Spanish-speaking populations of the Southwest. Linda Ronstadt is part whatever they're called. Linda Ronstadt is of German descent. And I don't know, about 20 years ago, she started calling herself Hispanic. You have to go a long, long way back to find any Hispanic connection to Linda Ronstadt, but who is, whiter than white. But I guess she could see which way things were going. Your mama says my race is Indo-European. I really like Linda Ronstadt, says Chokin 666. I used to like Linda Ronstadt. But then she became a racial justice warrior based on her assumed race. And, if Hispanic is being used in order to compensate people for past bad treatment, then obviously it should only apply to what they call Indios, not to those people like the ruling class of Mexico, which is about 9% of the population, which is entirely white and proud of it, who ruthlessly suppress, sometimes, with guns, the Indios of their country. And this is something that's not talked about, not really in Mexico and not in the United States, because, I don't know, it's kind of embarrassing or something. Buddy says affirmative action is sacred to the left as much as abortion or hating on white males. Who else do we have? Anyone else new? I have no idea if Mahler is accurate. Guessing with Russell, there is poetic embellishment, but his childhood in it is just tragic. I'd be curious to see the treatment of his wife, Alma Schindler Mahler, who ruined Mahler scholarship for the better part of half a century by her self-serving, lying memoirs in which, hey, Mahler, great conductor, later acclaimed as a great composer, but her memoir is all me, me, me. Why isn't everyone talking about me? Look at all the famous men I've been married to or had affairs with. What's this pro-commenter man? New name? Says Harvey Belafonte ain't black. He's just a good-looking white guy dipped in caramel. And Archie Bunker said that. Radon Chong's father is Scots, Irish, and Chinese, says Sneed. Linda Ross says she grew up speaking Spanish. Okay. All right. Okay. I think I'm going to get back to it here. And we're going to talk about the elections in the United States yesterday. And bad news for Democrats, good news for MAGA-ites. And we have a piece here from Kane at Citizen Free Press. Steve Kornacki, turnout nightmare for Democrats. The numbers are really, really bad. Republican turnout way up, Dem turnout way down. In Ohio, 232,000 more Republicans voted compared to 2018, while 169,000 fewer Democrats turned out. And as I say, good news for MAGA. This is from Marissa Martinez at Politico. Here are the Trump-backed candidates who won Tuesday's primaries. Donald Trump's endorsement record was unblemished in the Ohio and Indiana primaries. Last year, in special Senate and House elections, the former president's record was mixed. Kenny Loeffler of Georgia and Susan Wright of Texas lost their bids, while Mike Carey of Ohio and Julia Letlow of Louisiana won. Kelly Loeffler, the Republican Party, and there's this woman, this Air Force woman who kept being appointed, kept running for the Republicans in Arizona. She's like Kelly Loeffler, a dreadful candidate. This year, Trump's record is considerably better in the March Texas primaries, his first true test of 2022. All of Trump's chosen congressional and statewide candidates won their races, with the exception of scandal-plagued State Attorney General Ken Paxton, who was in a runoff later this month. In Tuesday's Indiana and Ohio primaries, Trump once again ran the table. All 22 of his endorsed candidates won. He threw his support behind almost every House GOP incumbent running for re-election, and a few hopefuls in open seat primaries, and his preferred candidate won in every case. His pick in the highest profile race of the day, the Ohio Senate GOP primary, also won the nomination largely due to Trump's endorsement power. Of course, the bar for success wasn't that high. Trump backed numerous incumbents who faced token primary opposition or were unopposed. Notably, Trump did not endorse in the Ohio governor's race, where Republican Governor Mike DeWine, one of the first prominent Republicans to acknowledge President Joe Biden's victory, fended off a stiff primary challenge. Trump bypassed the Indiana Senate race as well. Trump also didn't back Representative David Joyce, the incumbent in Ohio's 14th district, who issued a statement last month, and I can't repeat this. So, Frank LaRose, Secretary of State in Ohio, Dave Yost, Attorney General, and most important, J.D. Vance, who won with 32% of the vote. Vance, the author of the book Hillbilly Elegy, once referred to Trump as an idiot, called himself a never-Trump guy, and said he considered voting for Hillary Clinton. But he changed his tune once he began his pursuit of the Senate nomination. His conversion to full-throated Trump supporter paid off, as Trump delivered his stamp of approval not long before the primary, an endorsement that helped power Vance to victory. Vance will face Democratic nominee Tim Ryan in November. There was a movie made of Vance's book, Hillbilly Elegy, and I haven't seen the film, but I've rarely seen such negative reviews for a movie, which was not obviously a joke. Let's see, it was directed by Ron Howard, and it stars Amy Adams and Glenn Close, and both Amy Adams and Glenn Close were praised for their performances, but apparently the picture stinks. I think that the picture stinks, according to the critics, because they don't like the viewpoints expressed. The Independent reported that the film was widely criticized for perpetuating stereotypes about the poor. Katie Reif of the AV Club called it bootstrapping poverty porn and said that it reinforces the stereotypes it's meant to be illuminating. Owen Gleiberman, who is dreadful critic of Variety, wrote, as long as Close is acting up an award-worthy storm, Hillbilly Elegy is never less than alive. Amy Adams does some showpiece acting of her own, but as skillful as her performance is, she never gets us to look at Bev with pity and terror. David Ehrlich, he's a triple threat there. What is he, black, Jewish, and homosexual? A lot of Pokemon points there. He gave the film a C-. Again, when you have critics ganging up on a film like this, it's pretty obvious what's going on. there is an editorial statement at the American Mind called The Future of the GOP. J.D. Vance's victory in last night's Ohio Republican Senate primary is an important and hopeful sign for the future of the GOP. After Trump's loss in 2020, some were eager for a reversion to the comfortable platitudes of the pre-Trump days. We cannot let Trump define us for the future, said Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson, because that would just further divide our country and it would hurt our Republican Party. Whenever you hear people ostensibly on the right saying you shouldn't vote for this person or support this because it will further divide the country, what they're saying is just listen, take the list of demands from the left and then institute them, perhaps with some mild reluctance, but then later with full-throated acceptance. Trumpism frightened members of the old guard who saw it as their duty to protect the principled conservative brand, mild-mannered, respectable, and unwilling to rock the boat in pursuit of needlessly divisive culture war issues. The old guard and the never-Trumpers hoped that all that talk of immigration, trade, protectionism, and America first would go away, but it hasn't gone away, and for good reason. The problems Trump identified, the crises he was willing to name when few others would, haven't gone away either. They have gotten worse because the old guard doesn't have solutions to them. It makes no sense to recite old Reagan-era slogans about the free market when Chinese oligarchs have colluded with tech billionaires to drain the marrow out of America's working class. Invocations of private enterprise ring hollow when Disney, a vast corporation with its own county government, declares allegiance to a new sexual theology. And when that theology is preached in elementary school classrooms against parents' objections, encoded into TikTok algorithms and first grade lessons alike, it won't do to build your own social media platform for the simple reason that the US government has already built its own social media platforms, funding Google to keep tabs on Americans and overseeing online thought via the Department of Homeland Security's new Ministry of Truth. It's not just that the fundamental principles of natural law or natural right are any less essential, it's that the new challenges against them are new challenges and the right's defense of them must take new forms. Trump understood that. So does J.D. Vance, which is why Trump endorsed him. Much has been made of Vance's supposed pivot from never-Trumper to Trumpian darling. But when he made his name with the best-selling hillbilly elegy, Vance gave voice to the justified anger of the rural poor, concerns which he believes can find their best political expression in Trump and Trumpism. Initially, like many people, he was concerned that Trump might be drumming up populist energy only to manipulate it for his own cynical ends. Today, though, he sees that Trump spoke to and for the same despised and ignored segment of the population that Vance wrote about in his book. Vance acknowledged this when he said, quote, "The question presented in this primary was, do we want a border that protects our citizens? Do we want to ship our jobs to China or keep them right here in America for American workers? Do we want a Republican Party who stands for the donors who write checks to the Club for Growth, or do we want the Republican Party for the people right here in Ohio?" Unquote. That is the heart of the matter. Reasonable conservatives can argue and will continue to argue over whether Trump is the most effective spokesman for this message going forward, but that does not compromise the essential clarity of the new right's message. It is a winning message. Like Glenn Young's victory in Virginia, Vance's win indicates that people of every race and both sexes are justly incensed when they learn about the divisive poison of the new left's racial tribalism and when they see the ravages of transhumanist ideology in their communities. The new right's message is simply that Americans will not stand to see their productive capacities eroded, the wealth of their nation leached away in foreign lands, and their children's psyches compromised by invasive digital and ideological catechesis. That is the way forward for this country, and that is the path the GOP will chart if it wants to win. Other candidates and politicians, Blake Masters, Joe Kent, Josh Hawley, Ron DeSantis, are emerging to take the reins of this new future and seize the opportunities of the left's disastrous extremism. All these politicians have some differences, and not all are agreed on what Trump's personal role should be. But those differences, which detractors will continue to cite as evidence of political disarray, are in fact immaterial in light of the convictions which the new right shares. In the face of the unique challenges of the digital age and the woke revolution, these young leaders, unlike the graybeards desperately trying to put Trumpism back in the bottle, have a plan and they have enough courage to execute on it. That is something the GOP and America desperately needs. And again, this is an editorial at AmericanMind.org. And Thomas Leifson also reports on this at American Thinker. One notable feature of Trump's endorsement of Vance, he writes, is that Vance had early on said some very unkind things about Trump. After seeing Trump in office, he repudiated those views. Still, Trump's ability to get over the earlier insults tends to belie his reputation as thin-skinned. I think that's true. Some Republicans who've been hoping Trump will not run in 2024 must be disappointed in these results. His thumb on the scale may be decisive in a large field, but face it, J.D. Vance didn't even get a third of the primary vote, so Trump's influence, while critical, is not enough to overwhelm the rest of the field combined. And let's talk about, let's talk about more about populism. And there is a piece by Peter Franklin at Unheard, the European map that explains populist politics, looking at economic growth since the 2008 crash matches patterns across the continent. Populism has expressed itself in many different forms across Europe, but there is one factor that comes close to explaining it at a macro scale. The above map, tweeted out by the economist Daniel Lacalle, shows the change in GDP per head in every country since the pre-2008 recession peak, i.e. before the chaos caused by the global financial crisis. There are various issues with comparing GDP between different countries, not to mention different points in time, but the key point here is the broad geographical pattern. Looking at Western Europe first, the story is one of stagnation in most of the big economies, with Germany as the main exception. Germany also happens to be a country where populism has had comparatively little impact. The main populist party, the Alliance for Democracy, has been frozen out of national and regional government, and its electoral strongholds are limited to the former East Germany. Contrast that to the British experience, where the populist surge took the history-changing form of Brexit. As for France, populist parties of left and right now completely dominate the opposition to Emmanuel Macron. Turning to Southern Europe, we see that the economies of Spain, Italy, and Greece have suffered badly over the last decade. These countries were hammered by the Eurozone crisis and have yet to fully recover. One might expect this to provide fertile ground for a political backlash, and that is exactly what has happened. In Greece, the populist left has already formed one government, eventually crushed by the might of the European Central Bank. In Italy, the largest party, the populist right, is hitting new highs in support, and its leader, Giorgia Meloni, is in pole position to become the country's first female prime minister. Meanwhile, in Spain, the taboos of the post-Franco era are breaking down. The hard-right Vox party is currently on course to gain a share of national power as a coalition partner to the more moderate Partido Popular. The economic picture looks very different in the former communist countries of Central and Eastern Europe. The likes of Poland and Hungary have grown rapidly, though from a much lower base than the much richer countries of Western Europe. Populism has also taken a different form in the East. Rather than being an expression of protest, it is about parties of government distributing the proceeds of growth to their supporters while asserting national identity against real or imagined external threats. And let's look at this data here. Percentage change of GDP per capita since pre-2008 recession peak. Let's see, Britain is down 1.6%. Ireland is supposedly up some enormous amount. Portugal down 1.8%. Spain down 15%. France down 4.7%. Italy down 14.8%. Greece, Turkey down 25%. Greece down 34%. If you looked at the voting in the second round of the French presidential race, you notice a very significant thing, that it was the oldsters who went, people over 50, who went overwhelmingly for Macron, and it was young people under 50, and particularly the youngest voters who went heavily for Le Pen, which means, I suppose, in the absence of France completely replacing its population with Muslims, that populism is eventually going to triumph there. The unemployment statistics for young people in places like Spain, France, Italy are simply atrocious. So, it is no surprise that these people are voting against globalism. It's a very personal thing for them. Why can't I get a job? Well, you see changes in the world economy, changes that benefit the 1% and hurt everyone else, except the destitute, who of course are paid for by the government. There's a piece by Joel Kotkin at Unheard called "Do We Need a Capitalist Civil War?" The working class suffer when elites agree. He begins, "We Americans like to think of ourselves as a thoroughly modern people, living proof of what, with enough toil and grit, the rest of the free world can one day hope to be. And yet, for all our progressivism and idealism, America's political culture finds itself unable to escape the past. We may be living in a 21st century democracy, but that so-called democracy increasingly resembles something that could have been plucked out of feudal Europe, or perhaps more accurately, feudal Japan. For much of its history, Japanese politics was characterized by conflicts among its ruling daimyo and later between the great industrial zaibatsu, who replaced them as dominant powers. Similarly, America's politics is now being shaped by civil war, not between classes, but within the ruling capitalist elite. As the 2022 congressional elections approach, two sides are polishing their armor and fletching their arrows. In one corner stand the daimyo of the gentry corporate elite, largely drawn from the ranks of tech oligarchs and much of Wall Street. Their focus lies in the creation of a capitalist utopia rooted in paternalistic state control, much along the lines of the corporatist Great Reset. In the other corner, meanwhile, stand their opponents to the right, largely made up of those who own private capital and are therefore anxious not to see their activities curbed. These divisions reflect profound differences in industry, reminiscent of the 19th century conflicts between aristocratic merchants and British manufacturers, or the one that broke out between the daimyo who embraced industry and those samurai who stubbornly hewed to traditional ways. Drawing on this, the French economist Thomas Piketty aptly divides our capitalist class into what he calls the Brahmin left and the merchant right. One side, as its caste association assumes, tends to see itself as more spiritually enlightened as priests of the progressive secular religion. The merchant side, however, is more concerned with market competition, particularly from China, the cost of goods, and the impact of regulatory policies on their core businesses. Hang on just a second. And once again, there is a fleet of police cars across the street. Today, the Brahmin left has its base in large corporations and investors and has allied itself with the academic and media establishments, financing nonprofits and generally supporting increasingly intrusive government. By contrast, the merchant right draws its national support from the traditional middle class, skilled workers, high street business people, and small property owners, who have also become the bulwark of the Trumpian Republican Party. Until recently, these two opposing capitalist groupings have contented themselves with near peaceful coexistence. But the recent massive hysteria among progressives over Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter could signal the start of a more heated conflict, pitting competitive market-oriented business interests against the conformist gentry progressivism of so many of the largest firms. Joel Kotkin continues, the corporate shift to the left, particularly since the Black Lives Matter protest, has created a backlash within the capitalist class, with many concerned as what they see as the creation of a highly regulated, less competitive, and openly politicized economy. Add to this Biden's own embrace of progressive ideology, and it's hardly surprising that many traditional capitalists now fear for their future. Some of this reflects understandable concern over Biden's energy policies and taxes on the analog economy, where food is grown, products are manufactured and shipped, and oil and gas are drilled. In recent years, Republicans have reaped support from many of the families tied to the old economy that markets tangible products. Looking at contributions, the differences between business sectors are stark, with manufacturers and agribusiness favoring the GOP by 3-1, while the entertainment, internet, and publishing industries are overwhelmingly supporting the Democrats. To some extent, there is a conflict between those who invest and make stuff and those who gorge on media and digital tools. What makes Musk so different from his tech counterparts is that he remains primarily an industrialist, more in the mold of Great Valley founders like Robert Noyce or Jerry Sanders, building cars, spaceships, and tunnel-making equipment. Like any manufacturer, he needs reliable, affordable energy and worries about overregulation, which sets him against California's ultra progressive legislature. By contrast, Meta, Google, Apple, and Microsoft manufacture almost nothing in the United States and primarily make their money based on advertising or charging for services without much in the way of competition. So while many industrial firms support some protectionist measures against China, Silicon Valley is largely resistant to the idea. After all, on those rare occasions when they do manufacture products, they outsource the most critical production to China. Wall Street follows a similar post-national script, financing Beijing's industrial machine with its notoriously high carbon supply chains. A year or two ago, these elite divisions would not have been so pronounced. After the chaos of the 2020 election, big business seemed to welcome Joe Biden's presidency as a return to normality. Many capitalist elites, particularly in the tech and finance industries, invested heavily in elevating the somewhat doddering warhorse into the White House. Biden, they reasoned, was far more reliable than Trump, whose greatest talent seemed to be widening already serious divisions in the country. And at first, this corporate class seemed to support the Biden administration's priorities on immigration, racial equity, gender, and climate change. But the government's incompetent Afghanistan withdrawal, the intensifying border crisis, and its own economic program weakened this capitalist ardor. Most critical has been Biden's stunning failure to address the roots of rising inflation. While costs of living soared, his supporters claimed everything was either temporary or Vladimir Putin's fault. But it is clear inflation was rising rapidly before the Ukrainian invasion and is now considerably higher than key competitors such as Japan, Germany, France, Canada, and China. Meanwhile, those who have previously moderated the Democrat machine, as occurred during Bill Clinton's ascendancy, find themselves unable to restrain a party now dominated by its far left fringe. And for all its alleged benefits, wokeness is not generally a good business strategy. It just cost Disney an estimated $50 billion, while causing firms such as Netflix to lose subscribers, in part due to what Musk describes as a woke mind virus. Yet so deep are the partisan divisions that it's unlikely that much of the Silicon Valley and Brahmin left are ready to seek refuge in the clutches of the GOP. Yes, so much of wealth in America is based on toll collecting. Microsoft, Google, Facebook. What is that? What do they make? Nothing. How do they innovate? They don't. They simply have monopolies or quasi-monopolies and benefit from them. Oh, this is a funny story about lying. There's two kinds of lies. There's the good lies and the bad lies. This is from Neil Moss at the Hill Times. Information warfare amid Russian invasion of Ukraine forces feds to sort fact from fiction. Why? Why is it the goal of Canada's federal government to sort fact from fiction? What qualifications do they have this? What moral authority do they have to do this? MLI's Marcus Kolga says Russian disinformation has been quite sinister, while Ukraine's information operations are part of its battle for survival. So anything the Russians say is false, while anything the Ukraine says is true, even though the Ukraine just admitted that the Ghost of Kyiv scam was in fact a scam, despite them pushing it for weeks and weeks and weeks. While Russia disseminating disinformation about its information of Ukraine, the Canadian government is left trying to combat mistruths while ascertaining how the invasion is actually being carried out. In opposition to widespread reporting, Russia has declared that it is Ukraine killing its own civilians and that it is not at war. In an interview with the Hill Times last week, Russian Ambassador Oleg Stepanov criticized the Canadian government for always accepting the Ukrainian explanation of events. It's the position approved by the government that you have to blame Russia for everything and you have to whitewash everything the Ukrainian side does, he said, noting that when he was summoned by the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Marta Morgan, regarding alleged war crimes in Bucha, Ukraine, she called the Russian explanation not credible. Oh, was she there on the scene? Has there been an impartial investigation? No, of course not. They're simply claims made by the Ukrainian government, which they're notorious liars. Notorious liars. And as for what is actually going on in the ground in the Ukraine, the media has decided that's none of your business. None of your business. Because, supposing the news is bad for the Ukraine, we can't have, people losing heart over this, because everyone knows that Vladimir Zelensky is a modern day saint. From antiwar.com, Biden praises Lockheed for missiles in plant visit. Yes, these are halcyon days for the military industrial complex. CIA trying to contact Russians who are against the Ukraine war. Austin says the U.S. will maintain stockpiles of munitions sent to Ukraine. The Pope says that NATO may have caused Russia's invasion. Putin decree could cut Russia exports to the U.S. and Europe. EU considers Russian oil ban with exemptions for Slovakia and Hungary. In call with Macron, Putin says West should stop arming Ukraine. FBI did 3.4 million data searches of Americans in 2021. The FBI is investing in social media tracking, predictive surveillance. Oh, yeah, I'm sure they'd be excellent at that, especially when we learn, when people go nuts and murder a bunch of school children, that like that in that case in Florida, that people had complained over and over again that the fellow who killed all the school children in Florida was a dangerous nutcase. And the authorities decided, perhaps because he is a Hispanic named Cruz, to do nothing about it. And we are, let's see. Let's go to information liberation. Oh, libtards react to Supreme Court draft opinion overturning Roe v. Wade. Oh, yes. A lot of anger, I'm guessing. A lot of anger. Rabbi Mike Harvey says, time to go to war for our mothers, sisters, and daughters. We will not stand by and allow a group of white Christians to turn America into the dark ages again. Not this time. Okay. Oh, wow. He really hates Christians. F Christians and their never-ending imperialistic, nationalistic, fascist patriarchy that puts people's lives at risk and doesn't give a shit about what anyone or science says. Shame on all you who hold the cross. 2,000 years of your genocide continues tonight. And then he shouts some obscenities. Amanda Smith says banning abortion, even on a state level, is a violation of religious rights for Jews. I specifically cite Jews, Amanda Smith says, because one, I am one, and two, Christian supremacist leaders on the right love to use Judeo-Christian values to defend legislation that is more often than not a complete affront to Jewish values. What kind of Jewish values? Seems to me that Orthodox Christians like children, and they actually have a lot of children. Oh, let's see what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has to say. As we've warned, SCOTUS isn't just coming for abortion. They're coming for the right to privacy Roe rests on, which includes gay marriage and civil rights. House has seemingly forgotten about Clarence Thomas. Wicked man, apparently. Naomi Dan tweets, sharing again this important resource from Jewish Currents, a guide to self-managing abortion with misoprostol pills. Talia Lavin, this ridiculous person, this being a culmination of a holy war that's been ongoing since the 70s, you should be aware they are coming for absolutely everything that isn't straight, white, Christian, fertile marriage with a submissive, economically dependent, and fiscally constrained wife. Well, that's the dream. Talia Lavin also says, the other thing that infuriates me is the way the press goes out of its way not to call Christian theocracy what it is. I also hate living in a Christian theocracy. I'm not even Christian. This ban explicitly violates my religion. These people have gone crazy. Julia Jaffe, another example of the Soviet Union didn't send us its best, tweets, to think we spent 20 years fighting violent religious extremists abroad. Oh, and from Vice News, Christ is King. Christian nationalists are celebrating the end of abortion. The far right is stoked about what it sees as the impending collapse of abortion rights in the U.S. after the Scottish leak. Okay, Vice News is up for sale, and apparently there aren't many people interested in it, even though it was valued at $5 billion just a few years ago. I can explain why no one's interested in Vice. Vice is effectively the publishing arm of Antifa. Now that pretty much every regime media outlet is Antifa adjacent, Vice News is simply superfluous. And it's now time. Oh, I'm going to go to Tainter in a minute. But before that, I'm going to check on the chat. And here we go. Don Willis says, met with my congressman today, unimpressed, not a fan. Buddy says, my son has limited talent, but lots of all sense. Most kids at 12 don't have much of it and make moronic mistakes on the baseball field. Oscar Toe says, I would think in Little League, a kid could rack up some impressive stats if he had a solid bunt game. Dionys says, hello, says, I think being a man means you go to jail at least once for a fist fight. I remember, 15 years ago or something like that? I got hit by a car, hit and run, crossing the street. And I smacked my head and injured it. And then I went to the emergency room. It's not far from where I live. And it was Friday night. And so the wait was just horrendous. So I gave up and decided to walk home. And then I was not in fighting shape, as you might say. And then I fell again and hit the other side of my head. Cop later said it looked like I'd been shot through the head. But anyway, so the police show up and they asked me if I'd been in a fight. I said, a fight? The last time I was in a fight was in the 9th grade. Respectable commenting name says, I've been informed by many, many women that infanticide is a critical part of Judaism, almost makes one believe wild conspiracies about Sabbatean Frankist takeovers. Who else do we have? Why does that Hispanic donkey keep getting elected, says Unlimited 32. Well, once Democrats get elected in the district, they tend to be elected over and over and over and over again. Get elected 20, 30, 40, well, maybe not 40 times, This is a solidly Democratic seat. She was running against a longtime incumbent who foolishly basically decided really not to campaign in the primary, whereas AOC, to her credit, campaigned hard and was rewarded. William Hicks says, recall today how after 9/11, we were all supposed to be tolerant of Muslims. The attacks were not an indictment of a whole religion of peace. Apparently, Russians are not to be treated similarly. Unlimited 32 says, someone took his rant but replaced the word Christian with Jew and got banned from Twitter. The judge in that Florida school shooter case is about as hot as a judge gets, says Ann Run. One thing I hated in baseball was getting the sign to bunt, says Oscar Toe. It's a very useful skill, both for advancing the runner and for, getting on base if you're fast enough. It used to be that all baseball players learned how to bunt, unless you were Babe Ruth or whatever. Okay. Let's see. Let's go to Tainter and his the collapse of complex societies. And he is writing about the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. Emperors, upon accession, were often faced with an insolvent government and rarely were able to accumulate reserves for emergencies. When extraordinary expenses arose, the supply of coinage was frequently insufficient. To counter this problem, Nero began in 64 AD a policy that subsequent emperors found increasingly irresistible. He debased the silver denarius, raising the content of base metal to 10%. He also reduced somewhat the size of both the denarius and the gold aureus, a coin initially worth 25 denarii. This proved no solution for Vespasian, who increased the number of legions to 30. In and encountered a pressing need for money, and so both raised taxes and debased the currency further. Adding to the problem, Domitian, 81 to 96 AD, increased the pay of legionaries to 300 denarii per year, while Nerva, 96 to 98, established a public system for the care of Italian orphans. The Emperor Trajan, 98 to 117 AD, embarked on an ambitious and expensive program of military expansion. While successful in the field, the booty taken from the conquered lands apparently did not even cover the costs of his campaigns. And of that booty, more than one-third was distributed among the urban poor at some 650 denarii per head. Consequently, the denarius, which had been restored under Domitian and Nerva to its Neronian standard, was devalued by 15% to a level of 79 to 88% purity. Trajan's successor, Hadrian, 117 to 138 AD, dropped the financially untenable policy of expansion and abandoned the new acquisitions in Mesopotamia and Assyria. At the same time, however, he instituted a public dole at Athens, gave largesse to the poor at 1,000 denarii per head, and incurred heavy costs in his travels and building programs. To economize in military costs, from Hadrian's time on, army units were raised as often as possible from the locality where they would be stationed. Hadrian occasionally granted tax waivers, perhaps indicating that by this time higher taxation would have created difficulties. The next emperor, Antonius Pius, 138 to 161 AD, attempted to shrink the level of Hadrian's administration. He tried to reduce the number of government officials and even sold some of the imperial property and estates. Although he repeatedly gave largesse to the people of Rome at 800 denarii per head, Antonius Pius left in the treasury at his death a substantial surplus totaling 675 million denarii. This surplus proved short-lived. During the reign of Marcus Aurelius, 161 to 180 AD, the edifice of the empire began to crack. Two major crises confronted the empire while he held the throne. First, a devastating plague began in 165 or 166 AD. It lasted about 15 years and caused a significant loss of life, as much as 1/4 to 1/3 of the populace in some areas. Secondly, wars with Germanic tribes kept the emperor in the field for much of his reign. The Roman Empire, that had thrived on the plunder of expansion and that had at least maintained stability when expansion ceased and revenues leveled off, found itself hard-pressed to deal with stress surges of this magnitude. The cost of Marcus Aurelius's barbarian wars exceeded the level that could be supported by the empire's normal income. One consequence, as might be expected, was the depletion of Antonius Pius's surplus. Yet even with this surplus, Marcus Aurelius found his wars too expensive for revenues and was forced to finance the empire's efforts by conducting public auctions of imperial valuables. He also had to raise new taxes and debase the denarius to between 70 to 78% silver. Despite these difficulties, he still made donations to his soldiers and the poor. In addition to the problems of financing the barbarian wars, Marcus Aurelius faced a shortage of recruits for his army. Because of this, he was forced to settle the defeated Marcomanni within the borders of the empire on the condition that they furnish recruits. This is in some ways not surprising, for although population may have risen under the early Principate, by the 2nd century AD, there was a shortage of free agricultural labor. Not only did this have consequences for agriculture, but also for the military, which depended on the peasant population for recruits. There are indications that these financial exigencies extended to more than foreign and military affairs. The cities of the empire had few sources of revenue, so elected officials were usually drawn from the local wealthy classes and were expected personally to finance all or part of the duties of their offices. As these expenditures increased through time, the amounts paid by these magistrates rose. By the 2nd century AD, these duties grew to be so burdensome that candidates for office began to fall off. Commodus, 180 to 192 AD, who succeeded Marcus Aurelius, is of interest to this study, primarily for further debasement of the denarius. Under his rule, it dropped to as low as 67% silver. The death of Commodus marked the end of the Antonine dynasty. In the successional struggles that followed, Septimus Severus, 193 to 211 AD, ultimately emerged, but with an uncertain hold on the throne. To secure his position, he and his successors of the Severan dynasty courted the army. The resultant military costs strained finances. Septimus Severus increased the pay of troops to 400 denarii per year. His successor, Caracalla, 211 to 217 AD, raised it to 600, while at the end of the Severan dynasty in 235 AD, it stood at 750. The size of the military was also increased to 33 legions. Nor were military costs the sole problem. Septimus Severus supplemented the Roman dole with the addition of oil to the list of free commodities. Mattingly has noted of this time, the expenses of government were steadily increasing out of proportion to any increase in receipts, and the state was moving steadily in the direction of bankruptcy. To pay for all this, Septimus Severus debased the denarius to between 43 and 56% silver. The denarius by the early 3rd century was so reduced in value that Caracalla introduced a new coin, the Antonianus, which was supposedly equal to 2 denarii but of lower real value. His successors did not hesitate to debase it further. Caracalla also reduced the gold content of the aureus. The denarius, however, was the coin most worth debasing, since it was used to pay the troops, and this was the major item in the imperial budget. Caracalla is perhaps best known for his Act of 212, extending Roman citizenship to all free inhabitants of the empire. This had the consequence of vastly extending the pool of those liable to the Roman inheritance tax, which he incidentally doubled. Although good data are lacking for the early empire, these continued debasements were clearly inflationary. A slave that in Commodus's reign cost 500 denarii, for example, sold for 2,500 under the Severi. The older, more valuable coins would have been withdrawn, since people would naturally prefer to pay obligations in the newer, debased currency. Bands of military deserters plagued parts of the empire under Commodus, Septimus Severus, and Severus Alexander, 222 to 235 AD. Order was beginning to break down. Yet the disturbances of the early 3rd century were nothing compared with what would follow the end of the Severan dynasty in 235 AD. And we'll have more from Joseph Tainter tomorrow. Let's talk about Dave Chappelle, who's a very controversial man, because he says that women are women and men are men, and only women can give birth. Yes, I know. Shocking, right? This is from Jennifer Smith at the Daily Mail. Dave Chappelle says he refuses to let onstage attack overshadow his Netflix performance, but vows to cooperate with police as he's slammed online for joking it was a trans man who tried to stab him. The comedian released a statement Wednesday to brush off the attack by Isaiah Lee. Chappelle, 48, was performing at the Netflix's A Joke Festival at the Hollywood Bowl in LA Tuesday. Lee stormed the stage with a replica gun that stashes a knife in an attempt to stab Chappelle. He has been charged with assault with a deadly weapon. Chappelle was uninjured and continued with his set, joking that the attacker was a trans man. He had been joking about the woke brigade trying to cancel him over recent trans jokes when Lee stormed the stage. Chris Rock then performed and joked that the attacker was Will Smith, following the Oscars Slapgate incident. On Wednesday, Chappelle was attacked by the woke brigade again for joking that his attacker was trans. The Daily Mail has copious pictures and stories of this type, and this is no exception. And this fellow who attacked him, this fellow Isaiah, he looks like the police curb stomped him. He is seriously injured. The comedian released a statement Wednesday afternoon to say the incident Tuesday night was unfortunate, but not what he wanted to remember from the event. Quote, Dave Chappelle celebrated 4 nights of comedy and music, setting record-breaking sales for a comedian at the Hollywood Bowl. He refuses to allow last night's incident to overshadow the magic of the historic moment. And as unfortunate and unsettling as the incident was, Chappelle went on with the show. After Isaiah Lee, 23, attacked him on stage, Chappelle joked it was a trans man. He'd been talking about having to beef up his security in the wake of sparking controversy with his comments about trans people late last year when Lee stormed the stage. Despite the fact that someone just tried to attack him with a knife, critics are now accusing Chappelle of transphobia again for making the joke. It remains unconfirmed what Lee's motives were. His brother told Rolling Stone that he has mental health problems and has some connections to the trans community, but it's not clear what that is. Well, the trans community has for years now been yelling punch turfs. Yes, that's what they say over and over again, threatening physical violence against anyone who disagrees with them. And they act hurt when Dave Chappelle assumes it was a trans man, a trans person who attacked him. That would seem logical. Oh, Washington Post TikTok guy, Dave Jorgensen. Is he a comedian, a so-called comedian? Nothing about the Dave Chappelle attack is fun. The attack itself, the beatdown, the trans man quip, the reaction on Twitter, it all just sucks. Michael Packentire tweets, how can they say Dave Chappelle is anti-trans when he's totally transitioned this guy's arm into a leg? Zuma tweets, the guy whole tackled Dave Chappelle was in the wrong, but for Dave to go back on stage after 10 plus people, including Chris Brown, stomped his ass and joked that it was just a trans man. That is just so incredibly. Ernest Owens responded, if you think I'm going to feel sorry for that transphobe Dave Chappelle, please don't. The moment security protects him from the attack, he immediately jokes that it was a transgender man. It wasn't. But it's clear he will continue to put a target on trans people regardless. Yes, trans people attack cis people both verbally and actually with great regularity, but of course, they're the victims. The trans people are always the victims. And once again, going back to something when we were discussing passing, if, being trans means that you are oppressed and people are trying to erase you, and you're constantly threatened with physical violence or at the risk of suicide, why are so many people doing this? Lee was tackled by security guards who appeared to break his arm in the melee. He is described as weighing 140 pounds and is 5'11". That's pretty skinny, 5'11", 140 pounds. It raises questions about security of the Netflix show, its first ever live comedy festival, which forced fans to put their phones away but failed to spot the weapon. Netflix has not yet addressed the incident. After the attacker was detained, Chappelle thanked Jamie Foxx during the curtain call. He said, shout out to Jamie Foxx, by the way. Whenever you're in trouble, Jamie Foxx will show up in a sheriff's hat. And lots of photos. Fox replied, I thought that was part of the show. Chappelle said, I just grabbed the hair of that N-word head. His hair was spongy, absorbent. Chappelle said, I've just been doing this for 35 years. I just stomped an N-word backstage. I've always wanted to do that. After the attack, Jimmy Carr, who is an English comedian, shared a selfie taken with a fellow comedian and described his Los Angeles show as crazy. He tweeted, the Hollywood Bowl show with the legendary Dave Chappelle was crazy. Just happy everyone's okay. Chappelle came under fire last year over jokes about trans people in his Netflix comedy show, The Closer. I saw reports that the attacker was an aspiring rapper. Now, a lot of rappers are dangerous. They're always traveling around with loaded guns, taking loaded guns in the glove compartment, loaded guns in their luggage, taking them to airports. But it seems that even more dangerous than rappers are aspiring rappers, because anyone, can aspire to be a rapper. Okay, and the Netflix event is the streaming giant's first ever comedy festival and features performances from big name stars, including Seth Rogen, Snoop Dogg, Bill Burr, and Pete Davidson. The incident prompted members of the comedy community, including Jack Whitehall and Kathy Griffin, to voice their fears that performers are no longer safe on stage. And I hear tell that Will Smith's career is dead at the moment, that nobody wants him for new roles, and several projects that were already inked have been canceled. And Dave Chappelle, the showbiz community seems to be rallying behind him, which suggests to me that they don't believe all of those things they say about transphobia. Here's another story from the Daily Mail. Dave Chappelle's A-list fan club, Beyonce and Jay-Z, spotted leaving controversial comedian's show after witnessing armed man storm the stage. Beyonce and Jay-Z were joined by fellow wealthy celebrities, including Dr. Dre, Jamie Foxx, Madonna, and Elon Musk. Let's see, Christina Milian and Karrueche Tran were also there. Tesla CEO and new Twitter owner Elon, who is worth a whopping $265 billion, donned a t-shirt while seated next to Diddy at the event. Of course, Elon Musk is now a threat to democracy and everything we hold sacred, but apparently Diddy, that doesn't bother him. It doesn't bother him. Apparently, this Isaiah Lee, he puts stuff up on Instagram, troubling. It's called troubling stuff about Dave Chappelle. And I guess that's, let's go back to the chat here. Okay. Diddy, yes. He was Puff Daddy, and then he became Puff Diddy, and then we were supposed to just call him Diddy. Look, it's hard enough to remember people's names without constantly changing your name. Leave aside the fact that, I don't know, Puff Daddy is one of the stupidest things I've ever heard. It's almost as bad as Corn Pop. Jokin666 asked, did Madonna bring her face? David the Gnome says, it is true that stand-up comedy is actually pretty awful. Visionary Companion says, I would not walk across the street to see a comedian these days. I don't know. I think Bill Burr is quite funny. He seems to have been going through some personal problems recently. I watched one of his most recent TV special, and he's like the village atheist ranting against God, and on and on and on. Visionary Companion says Puff Bubba, then Piss Dribble, then I'm not going to repeat that. Did you know Puff Daddy is Canadian, says David the Gnome? I don't know it. I'm assuming. No, this fellow who is called Tory Lanez, who shot Megan Thee Stallion in the foot because he was jealous, and who has not been apprehended by the authorities and was apparently just found with a whole bunch of marijuana, but was not charged. There's different rules for famous people. And again, Tory Lanez, yes, he is a Canadian, and he is really stupid. And I've said this before, but every time I mention Tory Lanez, I'm going to read this from Wikipedia. He called himself Daystar, okay? And at 16, he adopted his new moniker, Tory Lanez. At the age of 16, Daystar dropped out of 10th grade, and he would begin performing songs at the outdoor concerts. At the age of 17, Daystar began singing, which he found an interest in. Presumably, that's why he was singing. However, he had never received any vocal training, unlike all the other rappers. Daystar also goes by the name Argentina Fargo. In an interview, he said, when I put foreign and banking together, it's like foreign money. I'm a Canadian dude walking around America. When you look at me, it's like looking at foreign money. So I call myself Argentina Fargo, like foreign money. That is just absolutely too funny. Let's see. Oh, yes. Let's talk about this. An awful lot of strange people coming to our Western countries. Strange people with strange views. But I suppose we're not supposed to notice. This is from Rory Tingle at the Daily Mail. A Labour councillor standing for re-election tomorrow, who allegedly shared an article that denied the Holocaust, said Hitler was right, and called Anne Frank a bisexual degenerate, has been suspended from the party. Belgica Guana, who is standing in the London borough of Newham, shared the piece entitled The Holocaust Host and the Jewish Promotion of Perversity in February 2016, the Jewish Chronicle reported. A Labor spokesman has told Mail Online that Guana is no longer a candidate endorsed by the party. It is understood that she is administratively suspended pending investigation. Guana appears on the ballot as a Labor candidate because she submitted her nomination forms to stand in the council election before she was suspended. Now, I'm looking at a picture of this woman. I have no idea, where she originally came from. But, the left is so keen on eliminating, racial prejudice that they actually call for the elimination of it, which is obviously a totalitarian project. And yet they don't seem to notice that so many of the immigrants that we are bringing into our Western countries have rather shocking racial attitudes, and they often act on them. But no, diversity is the highest form. And let's talk about the jab. This is from Kane at Citizen Free Press. Pfizer vaccine has just 12% efficacy in children, according to a new study. George Balotine tweeted, the latest batch of Pfizer documents has dropped. Look at the data, and now you'll know why they tried to hide it from us. Unbelievable. 1,223 fatalities. In children. Of course, the vaccine is, of course, fully effective and entirely safe. Oh, but wait, there's more. Again, this is from Kane at Citizen Free Press. Pfizer's own research shows that the vaccine is not safe for pregnant women. Pregnancy cases. This is from Pfizer's own data. Pregnancy cases, 274 cases, including 270 mother cases and 4 fetus baby cases, representing 270 unique pregnancies. Pregnancy outcomes for the 270 pregnancies were reported as spontaneous abortion, 23, outcome pending, 5, premature birth with neonatal death, spontaneous abortion with intrauterine death, 2 each, spontaneous abortion with neonatal death, and normal outcome, 1 each. No outcome was provided for 238 pregnancies. Pfizer data dump. 270 pregnant women were tested and 238 went AWOL. Of the 32 remaining, there was only 1 live birth. Frank Capone tweeted, remember, the vaccine is safe for pregnant women. Let me introduce the paperwork dumped by Pfizer, 50,000 pages. Now we know why they wanted to keep this hidden for 50 plus years. CDC, any comments? I know it's rare and the benefits outweigh the risk, right? This is what happens when you demand warp speed. I mean, it was obvious when Trump announced the warp speed initiative that there was going to be a vaccine really quickly, and it was going to be approved under emergency authorization, regardless of its safety or efficacy. I mean, everyone knows that, right? Let's see. This is from Steve Kirsch's Substack. Why more and more Americans are refusing to be vaccinated. I made a list in September 2021, 271 pages long. Here are a couple of shorter documents to summarize the reasons why intelligent people are refusing to get the jab and why we are winning them over. Overview. If people are wondering why you are refusing to get vaccinated, you can point them to one of 3 documents listed below. Document number 1, previously mentioned, 271 pages. My favorite personal reasons. 1, the all-cause mortality is negative. 2, the all-cause morbidity is negative. 3, nobody knows the 2 numbers above or is interested in obtaining them. Document 2, a lot of Americans don't want those shots, by Meryl Nass, basically summarizes the core reasons, and they are simple. 1, the shots don't work. 2, they kill and or injure people. Document number 3, here's a much shorter version of my 271-page document. It lists 77 reasons that break down into 4 categories: safety, necessity, efficacy, and honesty of the players. Medical gaslighting. This article by AMD summarizes why doctors are failing to recognize the problem. This behavior contributes to the perception that the vaccines are safe and effective and prolongs the agony for everyone. It's even worse when the doctors gaslight their patients. And let's go to Eugippius's Substack. Well, we're still seeing people like Justin Trudeau wearing masks. The British Columbian government, the Canadian government is still saying, get boosted, get boosted, get boosted. It's as if they have decided that we're just going to ignore the evidence. The evidence does not look good for us. So, as you know, I talked about last week, we'll build a computer model that will tell us that vaccinated people are at risk from unvaccinated people. You know, in building this model, they're actually admitting that the vaccine is not efficacious, because if the vaccine prevents you from getting the coronavirus, then why would you be afraid of unvaccinated people? Eugippius writes, zero COVID visionary and World Health Network founder Yanir Bar-Yam appears to be losing his grip on sanity, to judge from the massive wall of text he posted to Twitter yesterday, a transcript of a statement he made at some Occupational Health and Safety Administration hearing. As you look over my abbreviated edit of his insane rant, remember that zero COVID as a movement once enjoyed massive political and scientific influence across the world. I am Yanir Bar-Yam, professor and founding president of the New England Complex Systems Institute. I work on mathematical analyses to identify the variables necessary and sufficient to describe a complex problem at large scale. Science is about what we see and learn about the world around us. It's about life itself. All of us have formative experiences in life. For me, one of them was the loss of my sister, Arit, who was 2 years older than me. She cared deeply about helping people. For years afterwards, I drove her car. On the steering wheel, there was attached the Serenity Prayer that many of you surely know. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. In science, as in life, the most important question is, can we make it better? Today, I want to tell you that the pandemic has been mischaracterized as something we can't control, even can't do anything about. Here today, we have an historic opportunity to change the direction of society from failure causing illness, death, and disability on a spiral of devastation to a new path that will lead to an exit from this catastrophic condition. The place to start is in the workplace. Economy depends on health. Infection followed by infection, disability accumulating from long COVID organ damage after multiple infections is untenable. Why are people getting multiple COVID infections when they have been given 3 jabs or 4 or 5? Why is this happening? It would appear that this fellow Yanir Bar-Yam is a member of the Church of Jesus Christ, the fully vaccinated, certain radical adherents of which believe that those who have been fully vaccinated will never die. To continue the rant, there are 5 pillars of prevention: masking, ventilation, testing, social distancing, and vaccination. Each of these has multiple levels, from poor to outstanding. First, masks. From cloth and surgical masks that might have been somewhat effective early in the pandemic, to N95s that help now, to elastomeric respirators that would stop almost all infection, to PAPRs that could stop infection entirely. Second, ventilation and HEPA purification, according to conventional standards, help significantly. Elevating standards makes it even better, and the risks can be minimal in many locations if we place HEPA purifiers near workers or customers based upon measured airflows. Third, testing is the most widely accepted measure. Reactive, symptomatic, and exposure testing has a significant effect, in spreading panic. If people get tested and it says that they're positive and they have no symptoms, there's still a case. Fourth, social distancing. It ranges from avoiding gatherings all the way to lockdowns. Fifth, vaccination in conjunction with other measures could have stopped the pandemic, but over-reliance on vaccination alone undermined its utility because of new variants that would not have arisen if we effectively used other measures to reduce transmissions. Naysayers distort science, technology, and economics. It is important to remember that scientists in general are passive observers, like hell they are. Biologists see biological phenomena, not socio-technical advances or collective action, and surely not the opportunities of a global enterprise engaging in coordinated action. In this light, passivity makes no sense. We must recognize that there is a pandemic. Pandemics should not be thought of as waves, but as a fire. We know the solution is to put them out. Eugippius comments, We're watching the development of a technophilic religious system here. There are the 5 rights of masking, ventilation, testing, social distancing, and vaccination, the preventive pillars, which each consist of multiple levels. These are the only things that can save initiates from the pandemic fires. With enough virtue or will, adherents may dare to hope for a utopian world free of disease and death. As that Israeli scientist said a few months ago, if this had not been identified as the novel coronavirus and not, claimed to be an existential threat to the world, no one would have noticed it. And it's true, no one would have noticed it. Respiratory diseases have been killing people in substantial numbers forever. And let's go to Alex Berenson's Substack. And urgent. Prudential Financial, the largest U.S. insurer, is ending its COVID vaccine requirement. Whether you are an employee, contractor, or visitor, you will no longer need a COVID vaccine to walk into a Prudential Financial building as of June 6th. Sounds like Prudential doesn't see much benefit in mRNA vaccines for COVID. But what would they know? They're only the largest American health and life insurance company by assets, second by policies written. Not like they have a lot of data to check. And another conspiracy theory comes true. The Centers for Disease Control use cell phone tracking data to measure whether Americans were complying with lockdowns, possibly including the unconstitutional state travel quarantines. How about that? How about that? And let's go to adailyskeptic.org. And we have a news roundup. COVID hospital admissions plunge below 1,000 for the first time since before Christmas as Britain's wave continues to fizzle out naturally and health bosses start to wind down daily stats updates. Is China's Great Firewall about to collapse? China has turned online censorship into a domestic industry, employing 2 million apparatchiks to suppress dissent. Yet Shanghai's dystopian zero COVID lockdown policy is testing the Great Firewall to its limits. As vaccine demand collapses, the UK faces a £4 billion of waste, with 80% of its 650 million dose stockpile unused. Does the EU's oil embargo make sense? Well, yeah, Germany has said we have these perfectly safe nuclear reactors. We're going to shut down. We've shut down because reasons. And now, Russian oil, we don't need that. Where is their energy going to come from? Indian Supreme Court rules vaccine mandates unlawful as courts around the world push back against pandemic state overreach. £10,000 lockdown fine case collapses, hundreds more to follow, says lawyer. Hundreds of restaurants and gyms hit with lockdown fines could see their fixed penalties revoked in the courts, a leading lawyer has suggested. Lancet vaccine study author says her data show danger signal of vaccine heart deaths, but the powers don't want to know. The lead author of a preprint study in The Lancet examining all-cause mortality in the COVID vaccine trials has said that her work shows a potential danger signal for heart-related deaths connected to the mRNA vaccines that warrants further scrutinization. Speaking to Unheard's Freddie Sayers, Professor Christine Stabile-Ben from the University of Southern Denmark added that there is major pushback to her efforts to investigate the effects of vaccines on all-cause mortality, and many regulators and companies simply don't want to know. While stressing that the numbers in her study are often too small to provide statistical significance and ground firm conclusions, Professor Stabile-Ben observes that there is an overweight of cardiovascular deaths in the Pfizer group, which is a potential danger signal that warrants further scrutiny. Sajid Javid, who is the mayor of London, phones hospitals to ask, why are you defying my COVID rules? Too funny. So let's talk a little bit about that leak from the Supreme Court. And Canada has decided it wants in on this. This has absolutely nothing to do with Canada. There is no significant political support for restricting abortion in Canada. None of the parties are calling for it. But again, Canada wants in. I suspect because of cable television, the ubiquity of cable television, there seem to be many Canadians who believe that American law applies in Canada. You saw that for years and years when people saw, cop dramas, cop shows with the Miranda warning being given by cops. And it turns out polls showed that a great many Canadians, perhaps a majority, thought that this same Miranda warning applied in Canada. But let's go to Kane, Citizen Free Press, for a story about Joy Behar. In 2009, Kenyan women enforced a sex ban until political infighting ceased. Within 1 week, there was a stable government. We could have more power than we think we have, and some of it could be right in the bedroom. Yes, she's calling for a sex ban, sex strike. I'm willing to do my part, okay? I'm willing to declare here, to the whole world that I will never have sex with Joy Behar or attempt to have sex with Joy Behar or even think about having sex with Joy Behar. No, off limits. The hysteria grows. This is from Peter Hassan at Fox News. Florida Representative Byron Donalds and Texas congressional candidate Wesley Hunt, two Black Republicans, slammed Representative Eric Swalwell, Democrat of California, for claiming that Republicans want to ban interracial marriage. The Republicans won't stop with banning abortion. They want to ban interracial marriage. Do you want to save that? Swalwell wrote on Twitter late last month. Well, then you should probably vote. Perhaps Swalwell was what we call tired and emotional. Hi, Eric. My name is Wesley Hunt. I'm a Republican nominee in a congressional district that is 70% white. I'm Black. I'm in an interracial marriage, and my wife and I have two biracial daughters. Hunt tweeted, Republicans are celebrating diversity while white liberals like yourself race bait. Yeah, some more DR3. But of course, didn't he have a long sexual relationship with a woman from China, said to be a spy? Joe Biden, of course, has waded in. Again, Kane at Citizen Free Press. MAGA crowd is the most extreme political organization in American history. More extreme than the KKK, more extreme than the Know-Nothings. President Biden says overturning Roe could result in segregating alphabet people children in school. Wow. One is tempted to say that it's senility that causes him to say things like this. But of course, the progressives actually believe this. And again, from Citizen Free Press, Motherboard, which is part of Vice, advises us that misoprostol is relatively easy to acquire from veterinary sources, since in addition to medically inducing abortions, it's also used to treat ulcers in horses. Oh, you may be reminded of ivermectin, which is used to control parasites in horses. It became a favorite but ineffective COVID treatment among conspiracy theorists. The main difference here is that misoprostol does something other than causing diarrhea. So Vice is promoting animal medicine to its abortion-crazed fan base. And, I can see why people might consider abortion in some cases to be a regrettable necessity. These people just love abortion. They love the idea of it. They love the reality of it. This is from Mara Forrest and Zian Lum at Politico. Reaction on Parliament Hill to the leaked draft of a U.S. Supreme Court decision that would overturn Roe v. Wade unfolded much as it does every time abortion rights are in the news. The Liberals and NDP were quick to voice their support for reproductive rights. The Conservatives were quick to not say much. The Liberals were quick to use that against them, and so on. The day began with news that Conservative interim leader Candice Bergen had instructed her caucus not to comment on the leak. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau weighed in quickly, tweeting that every woman in Canada has a right to a safe and legal abortion. Various Liberal cabinet ministers chimed in to voice their support for reproductive rights and accused the Conservatives of hiding their true colors. Why don't you just say abortion on demand instead of reproductive rights? This use of euphemisms suggests that they are not entirely comfortable with their destructive insanity. By the end of the day, the Conservative Party and various Conservative leadership candidates were clarifying their positions on abortion. It was all a bit of deja vu. There is, in fact, a relevant policy angle to this. The Liberals promised during the last election campaign to add regulations to the Canada Health Act to ensure equitable access to sexual and reproductive health services. That promise landed in Health Minister Jean-Yves Duclos' mandate letter, but we haven't heard much about it since. Instead, it was the politics of the thing that won the day. Foreign Affairs Minister Mélanie Joly, for example, had lots and lots to say about the Conservatives, both in person and online. The silence from the Conservatives is deafening, she tweeted. She told the reporters that Tory leadership candidates are all trying to court the anti-choice vote, which is not actually true, but why bog down in details? Joly warned that Canada needs to ensure there is no backsliding of women's rights to choose, but the threat of that seems somewhat remote. Yes, indeed. Given the only party with a sizable caucus of pro-life MPs has tied itself in knots for years, promising not to restrict reproductive rights. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh told reporters the right to abortion is secure. The right to abortion is secure in Canada, but equal access remains a problem. Apparently, there's just not enough abortions being performed in Canada. And as for the Conservatives, as ever, it's complicated. Politico's Nick Taylor-Vasey takes a look this morning about how Campaign Life Coalition is responding to the news from south of the border, and the word they're using is fortuitous. The pro-life advocacy group is expecting a fundraising bump, just as it's pumping resources in the Conservative leadership race and bolstering socially conservative candidate Leslyn Lewis. I'm sure these people at Campaign Life Coalition, their hearts are in the right place, but they're stupid. The Conservative Party is not going to decide to support the restriction of abortion in Canada. It's not going to happen. What Campaign Life Coalition should be doing is try to change public attitudes about abortion. Meanwhile, Conservative frontrunner Pierre Poilievre says he wouldn't introduce laws restricting abortion access. Jean Charest and Patrick Brown have said they're pro-choice. There's a typically deranged article at the Hill Times by Erica Eiffel. Political bodies are choice, I guess, except when it comes to vaccinations. Under his eye, indeed. Across the border, Republicans and conservatives are alike, are remaking the United States in the image of the Republic of Gilead. Yeah, sure they are. Sure they had. In the 1980s, the KKK put out wanted posters for abortion providers. Sure they did. If you force white women to have babies, you have systematically reduced their economic power and therefore their political power while ensuring the continuation of the white race. This woman is speaking as if the continuation of the white race is a question under discussion. They give you an idea how much this Erica Eiffel, a black woman, hates white people. Why she is in Canada, that's an interesting question that nobody asks. Settled debate or not, Canadian politicians weigh in on U.S. Supreme Court abortion rights leak. And this is from Rachel Aiello at CTV News. The stunning leak, etc. MPs persisting differing views were on display in the House of Commons after a symbolic push to affirm abortion rights failed. The draft leak has also sparked questions about what could happen in Canada. Nothing. In a statement, Action Canada for Sexual Health and Rights, formerly known as Planned Parenthood for Canada, Action Canada, said that 25% of current MPs have voted in favor of attempts to restrict abortion in Canada. Although the context in Canada is different, it would be naive to ignore the impact of these movements on abortion access in Canada. Why would it be naive? Why would this be naive? We have our own laws. in Canada. We have our own laws. I've always been the person that says it's a woman's right. That's who I am, said Ontario Conservative MP and chair of the House Status of Women Committee, Karen Vecchio, though not all in the party feel the same. When it comes to the debate in Canada, Conservatives' position remains what it has been since the Harper government. Access to abortion was not restricted under Prime Minister Stephen Harper, and the Conservative Party will not introduce legislation or reopen the abortion debate, Candice Bergen said, noting that it's a topic the party allows free votes on. You know what's going to happen? I don't know, in the next election or leading up to the next election. How much do you love abortion? We've seen that you said that you personally don't support it, but politically you will support it. But tell us, how much do you love abortion? You love abortion. I mean, you love abortion this much, right? Because if you don't agree with me that you love abortion this much, you're a dangerous person who must be kept out of a government. And there's just endless stories about this. I guess there's nothing else going on in the world. Like, hey, remember the Ukraine? Huh? Does anyone still care about that? This is from Mia Ravson and James McCartan at National News Watch. Liberals promise to protect abortion access in Canada, but aren't clear yet on how. What? So apparently there's a problem of access to equity or some such thing. Well, why? Oh, and apparently for the longest time, there was no abortuary on Prince Edward Island, which apparently was a major crisis for some reason. Perhaps they're just not too keen. There hardly anybody, lives in Prince Edward Island, which is Canada's Toy Town province. Perhaps they're just not too keen. Amanda Connolly at the CSIS Daily or Global News says, as the Roe v. draft ruling draws Canadian fire, Americans have their own laws, Amanda Connolly. Has Trudeau lived up to his promises? That is to say, is it true that there's a, abortion shortage in Canada? Women and Gender Equality Minister Marcy Yen, who lied about being harassed by the police, and her lie was exposed by documentary evidence, but that didn't stop her being nominated as a Liberal candidate and didn't stop her being elected in Toronto. She said people in Canada cannot afford to be bystanders when it comes to protecting reproductive rights. Ooh, what, should Canada invade the United States and demand that Roe v. Wade be upheld? Are Canadians going to start boycotting American things? Because if Canadians stop boycotting American things, they're going to run out of things very quickly indeed. Pretty much everything that we watch and see, and most of the things that we buy, come from America or other foreign countries. Oh, okay. Here's Amanda Connolly again from Global News. Public Safety Minister Marco Mendicino says he will be speaking with the Canada Border Services Agency to make sure its staff know Americans seeking abortions can come to Canada for care. Speaking with reporters Wednesday, Mendicino said people in the U.S. may be feeling doubt about whether they will be able to access abortion if Roe v. Wade is overturned. So is Canada going to pay for foreigners to have abortions in Canada? What about the Canadians who are having abortions? Are they, are we giving them enough credit? Are we giving them money? Perhaps the government should, issue a grant of $500 or $5,000 to every Canadian woman who has an abortion, because the extinction of the Canadian people. I mean, that's the dream, right? That's the goal, isn't it? We don't need Canadians to have children because we can get all the children we need from foreign countries. This is from Laura Osman of the Canadian Press. If the government wants to solidify reproductive rights in Canada, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh suggests it start by launching pharmacare with a full slate of birth control options. Reproductive health has been in the spotlight since a U.S. draft, et cetera, et cetera. Singh said access to abortion is a huge concern in Canada. No, it isn't. And he wants to see more clinics and hospitals offering the service closer to people's homes. Well, maybe they could have, abortion machines in every apartment building, or in every community center in Canada. Got to get those abortion numbers up. We know that the cost of contraceptives are prohibitive for a lot of people, Singh said. Oh, are they prohibitive? Really? Canada is one of the only countries with universal health care that does not also have universal access to contraception for women, according to a 2019 University of British Columbia study. Yes, and how much does this cost? If you go to Walmart, how much does a month's worth of birth control pills cost? That might have been something that you would want to put in your story, right? Canadian Press or Global News, whatever it was. This phantom problem of access to contraception and abortion. I've mentioned previously that Susan Delacourt is the voice of received elite opinion in Canada. She writes for the Toronto Star, and this is her effort. Donald Trump's legacy puts abortion back on Canada's political agenda. No, it doesn't. It's not on Canada's political agenda because Canada and the United States have different laws. It's turning out that Donald Trump was easier to defeat electorally than culturally in the United States. Susan Delacourt writes, was it really all that easy to defeat Donald Trump? It seems like it was a major campaign. The annual March for Life, put in scare quotes, in Ottawa, billed as the nation's premier pro-life event, is always political, some years more so than others. Yeah, I guess it would be political because, they want to change the law to restrict abortion. In politics is a bad thing to Susan Delacourt, unless, of course, it's her people that are engaged in this. And apparently I'm related to this woman called Lisa Van Dusen. And she, for some reason, is given a regular slot in Policy, the magazine of Canadian politics and public policy, which is ostensibly an NGO, but which is as close as this to government. The bad news for Americans and citizens everywhere who believe in reproductive and privacy rights, except when it comes to, vaccines, is that anyone who presumed Donald Trump's Supreme Court packing mission, Supreme Court justice retires, then the president nominates a successor. That's not what packing means, you clown. Oh, as an anti-democracy president, including the nomination of justices, especially acting as sleeper agents, would lie about their positions on Roe v. Wade during their Senate confirmation hearings and then overturn it in practice, have proven to be prescient. Let's see. In domestic political terms, the Alito draft threatens to overturn the reproductive rights status quo that has been in place in America since 1973, and that has been relentlessly under assault at the state level by Republican administrators, especially recently. Those measures have included the introduction of vigilantism 6 months before November midterm elections that will determine whether the next 2 years of Joe Biden's first term, his first term, do we even know he's going to be alive in 2024? Will be more or less legislatively intractable than the first two. The sudden emergence of abortion as not just a collateral issue, but possibly a ballot question could go, at least to this early writing, in one of two ways. Terrible, terrible, terrible writer. Some observers are already reading the Alito draft as an attempt to undo decades of progress and return to a past of criminalized choices forced on women who are not criminals. In this unprecedented context, the debate over reproductive rights isn't only about religion when life begins, whether you would or wouldn't have an abortion yourself, or your views on feminism, birth control, or murder. In an era when technology, corruption, and propaganda have combined in a global anti-democracy power shift away from human beings and toward unaccountable players and governments, you mean like George Soros? Women's rights have become human rights in ways that put the cliche to shame. Shame. Yes, this woman's writing is shameful. And that's it for today. I'm going to take a final look at the chat. Anyone heard about Bologna introducing the Chinese-style social credit for real? They're doing it, says Ogan's Iron. Jokin666 says there are some indigenous Jews in Italy prior to diaspora, at least. I forgot what they're called. Who else do we have? I found northern Italy a great place, very European. Too bad it's turning into a World Economic Forum hellhole. Says Ogan's Iron. I hear it's the pollution is terrible in northern Italy. That's what I've read, at any rate. Okay, who else do we have? So are the infanticide deserts like food deserts, i.e. not real, says respectable commenting name. There's a lot of there's a look overlap with some Italians and Jews, says David the Gnome. Well, if you want to go back to Roman Empire days, there's a lot of interbreeding between Romans and Jews, which can be detected to this day. Noted punk rocker Warren Kinsella infuriated that men keep telling women what to do with their bodies, says Palcasso 88. Yes, he's always a rebel, that Warren Kinsella, isn't he? He still plays in a punk rock band, and he's over 60 years old. And his role, as he sees it in the history of punk rock in Canada, not just Canada, but the world, I think the last time I checked, he was close to claiming that he'd invented it, actually. I heard that they are rebooting Kids in the Hall, says David the Gnome. Yes, I saw that too. And they say, we like each other now, and this time we're not pretending. Alrighty. I think that's it. And I will be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. Thank you all for tuning in. Greatly appreciated. If you would like to make a donation to the live stream, my PayPal account is linked to kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations to the live stream may be made directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.